The Andrade house dominated the neighborhood like a modern castle. Perched on top of a small hill surrounded by pristine gardens and ornate iron gates, it wasn't just the kind of mansion that said wealth, it shouted power to anyone passing by. Every morning at exactly 6 o'clock, the first rays of sunlight lit up its massive glass windows, reflecting the golden sky like mirrors. That morning, Sophia was making her way up the hill toward the main gate. She wore her spotless uniform, a freshly pressed white shirt and a navy blue skirt, but her shoes already showed signs of wear. She had been a nanny for more than 15 years, and for the last 2 she had worked for the Andrade family. Not by choice, but by necessity. The Andrades were known in town not only for their fortune, built through real estate, but also for the arrogance they carried like a trophy. The matriarch, Lucia Andrade, was as elegant as she was sharp, a blade in heels. Every gesture, every glance carried judgment. The patriarch, Roberto, was rarely home, too busy closing deals and appearing in business magazines. Their children, Lara and Gustavo, spoiled teenagers of 15 and 17, seemed to have inherited the worst of their parents, the absolute certainty that they were better than everyone else. Sophia knew how to stay invisible. Years of experience had taught her that silence and efficiency were the keys to surviving in houses like this. Still, it was impossible to go unnoticed for long. Lucia had a special gift for spotting even the smallest flaws. As Sophia stepped inside, the echo of voices drifted from the dining room. The smell of fresh coffee and warm bread filled the air, but tension hung like a heavy mist. "Finally," Lucia said without even looking up from her cup. "I thought you'd forgotten you work here." Sophia glanced at the clock discreetly. 6:59 a.m., still before her start time. She didn't reply. She simply set her bag down in the corner and went to the kitchen to prepare breakfast for the children. While arranging the tray with sliced fruit and toast, she heard heavy footsteps behind her. Gustavo walked in, tossing his backpack onto the counter. "Is this all there is?" he asked, grabbing a slice of melon and grimacing. "You know, I hate melon. I can swap it for strawberries if you'd like," Sophia replied with the trained calm of someone who knows any wrong reaction would be used against her. "Doesn't matter," the boy said, shoving the fruit to the floor. "It's your fault anyway." Sophia bent down to clean it up, feeling his gaze press on her back. It wasn't the first time. It wouldn't be the last. In the dining room, Lucia and Lara were laughing at something on a phone. Sophia entered with the tray, set it down on the table, and stepped back, waiting for instructions. "You forgot the French jam," Lucia said, raising an eyebrow. "How many times do I have to tell you? We're not in the countryside, Sophia. Here, we serve the best." Sophia apologized and went back to the kitchen. Inside, something twisted in her chest. It wasn't just the humiliation, it was how constant it was. The way the Andrades reminded her, day after day, of her place. When she stepped out the back door to fetch something from the outside pantry, she heard Lara's muffled laugh. Peeking through the window, she saw the girl showing her mother and brother photos on her phone. Photos of Sophia, taken in secret, while she cleaned, carried groceries, or rested for a moment. Photos that clearly were the butt of their joke. In that moment, something shifted in Sophia. It wasn't pure anger, it wasn't sadness. It was a quiet clarity, a thought that came like a whisper. They won't laugh forever. The sun was already high when she returned to work, but inside the day had turned dark. From that moment on, Sophia knew every move she made would be calculated. Every gesture, every word, every glance would have a purpose. And for the first time, she began to plan, not just how to endure the Andrades, but how to bring them down. Sophia was never the kind to be easily broken. She had been born in a small rural town, the daughter of a bricklayer and a seamstress. Her childhood was simple, but marked by a lesson her parents repeated like a mantra. Work hard, but never bow your head to those who try to humiliate you. That phrase echoed in her mind every single day, But life had its own plans for testing even the firmest convictions. At 19, after her mother's sudden death, Sophia dropped out of the technical course she was taking to help raise her two younger brothers. With her father ill and unable to work, she began taking any job she could find, cleaning houses, caring for the elderly, and eventually working as a nanny. Over time, she became known for her patience and skill with children. But she also learned that to survive in wealthy households, it took more than competence. It required swallowing your pride on a daily basis. Some employers were respectful, others less so. The Andrade family, however, elevated the art of humiliation to a whole new level. Her first contact with them came through an employment agency. Sophia remembered the day as if it had happened yesterday. Sitting in the luxurious reception area of the mansion, she studied the artwork on the walls and the imported leather chairs, trying not to look out of place. Lucia Andrade walked into the room with firm steps, wearing a pristine white dress and a cloud of expensive perfume that filled the air. "Do you have references?" she asked without smiling. "Yes, ma'am," Sophia replied, handing over a neatly organized folder. Lucia flipped through it quickly, pausing on one of the letters and arching an eyebrow. "You worked for the Vasconcelos family. They're demanding, and yet they let you go?" Sophia kept her tone calm. "They moved abroad." "I see," Lucia said, though her voice made it clear that any explanation was just noise. Sophia was hired the same week. The salary was better than in any previous job, but the emotional cost would come soon enough. Roberto Andrade, the patriarch, was rarely home. When he was, he exuded authority and coldness. He was the type of man who looked at people over the top of his glasses, as if they were always beneath him. He never spoke harsh words directly to Sophia, but his silence, his long, measuring stares, said far more than any insult could. Lara, the daughter, had inherited her mother's beauty and her father's disdain. At just 15, she ruled social media and used the nanny as the target of jokes she recorded in secret. Short videos of Sophia cleaning windows or tripping over rugs were shared in private groups, always with mocking captions. Gustavo, the eldest, was even crueler. His comments, disguised as jokes, often targeted Sophia's humble background. He made a point of calling her farm girl, knowing it hurt her, and precisely because it did. Despite it all, Sophia endured. The money supported her father and helped pay for her brother's education. Each humiliation was swallowed with the same discipline she used to wash dishes and make beds, in silence, with precise movements, without letting her feelings show. But there was something the Andrades didn't know. Sophia had a flawless memory for details. She kept mental notes of schedules, conversations, secrets, and family habits. She knew when Lara was texting people her mother would disapprove of. She knew about the business deals Roberto discussed on the phone when he thought he was alone. And she knew that Lucia kept more than just makeup locked in her private office drawer. This silent collection of information wasn't born from curiosity, but from survival. Sophia had learned early on that knowledge was the only currency that could compete with money. That night, after the incident with the photos and the laughter, Sophia sat in the modest kitchen of her small rented apartment and opened an old notebook. On the first page, she wrote, "Andrade Plan." She listed schedules, routines, and weaknesses. Next to each family member's name, she made a short note. Lucia. Immaculate public image, avoiding scandal is top priority. Roberto. Real estate dealings, has enemies in the market. Lara. Obsessed with social media, can't stand losing followers. Gustavo. Explosive temper, quick to incriminate himself in arguments. Sophia knew it wasn't time to act yet. But for the first time in a long while, she didn't feel powerless. Every humiliation from now on would be fuel. And when the moment came, the Andrade family would never see where the blow was coming from. The days following the night Sophia began her Andrade plan passed like the gears of a carefully wound clock. The mansion kept its usual rhythm, an impeccable breakfast on the marble table. imported cars gliding in and out through the automatic gates, and the steady parade of high society visitors. But for Sophia, everything felt different. Now, every interaction with the Andrade family was studied with clinical precision. Every word, every gesture was mentally recorded. On Monday, for example, Lucia called Sophia into her office for an urgent task. "I need you to organize these contracts in the right order," she said, pointing to a stack of documents on the glass desk. "But be careful, they're confidential." Sophia nodded, slipping on thin gloves to avoid leaving fingerprints. As she sorted through the papers, her eyes caught scattered phrases: parallel negotiation, unregistered transfer, and strict confidentiality clause. She didn't understand every legal detail, but she knew enough to recognize something meant to stay far from curious eyes. She memorized the name of a construction company mentioned several times. 2 days later, on a sweltering morning, Lara sat on the veranda with her phone in hand. Sophia was bringing her a glass of juice when she overheard the teenager speaking on speakerphone. "No, you can't post that yet," said the voice of a friend. "Your mom will freak out." "Relax," Lara replied. "No one will know it was me." Sophia didn't know what it was about, but she was already jotting it in her notebook. Forbidden post? Find out content. The first step of revenge, she knew, wasn't to act impulsively. It was to build a network of small levers, pressure points that could be pulled at just the right moment to make the whole structure collapse. Gustavo was the next to hand her ammunition. He had a dangerous habit, using his father's corporate card for personal purchases. Sophia, who often received the deliveries, noticed boxes of clothing and luxury accessories, some from brands not even sold in Brazil. One afternoon, as she opened the door for a delivery man, she heard Gustavo upstairs yelling into his phone, "Relax, my dad never checks the statements." That line went straight into the notebook. But Sophia wasn't just collecting information. She was also planting herself into seemingly innocent situations. On Friday, during dinner, Roberto casually mentioned he had an important meeting the following Monday with international investors. "It'll be at the Imperial Hotel," he said, wiping his mouth with a napkin. "I want everything perfect, no distractions." The next day, Sophia forgot a small note from one of Lucia's suppliers on the office desk. The note, deliberately left in plain sight, mentioned the name of the same hotel but also referred to a controversial event taking place there on the same day as the meeting. It wasn't a lie. Sophia had read the news online, but she knew Lucia would get anxious at the thought of the family's name being associated with anything publicly questionable. And as expected, she overheard the matriarch on the phone moments later, trying to convince Roberto to change the meeting location. Small cracks were starting to appear in the Andrade family's perfect facade. The tension was rising, and Sophia could sense that, for the first time, they were starting to make mistakes. That night, in her apartment, she reviewed the notebook. The list of information already filled several pages. At the bottom, she wrote a short sentence: "Silence is my weapon, and time is my ally." She knew it was still too soon for the final blow, but the first moves had been made, and with each passing day she was closer to delivering the perfect revenge. The Andrade plan was no longer just a notebook of scribbles. Slowly, it had turned into an intricate mental map where every member of the family was tied to a set of carefully cataloged weaknesses. Sophia had spent years observing them, and now, for the first time, she could see how all the pieces might fit together. That Saturday morning, she woke earlier than usual. Sitting at her kitchen table with a cup of strong black coffee, she spread out 3 large sheets in front of her, covered in names, arrows, and dates. There was nothing casual about it. It was a draft of the Andrade downfall, designed to unfold like a row of dominoes, each one tipping the next until every single one of them was cornered. The first point of attack would be Lucia. The matriarch was the guardian of the family's public image. Her reputation as an influential socialite and businesswoman was her most precious and most fragile asset. Sophia knew that if she could put even a small stain on that image, everything else would crumble far more easily. She began subtly. While chatting with the housekeeper who worked at the mansion twice a week, she let slip, like it was nothing, that Mrs. Lucia seemed nervous about some documents. Sophia knew that in domestic work circles, rumors spread like wildfire. Within days, the tidbit had evolved into a far more colorful story, complete with insinuations and embellishments. For Roberto, she chose a different path. He was careful with his public persona, but not with the company he kept in business. Sophia had already seen messages on his phone from businessmen who clearly preferred shortcuts over following the law. One late afternoon, while organizing the library, she seized the moment when Roberto left his laptop unlocked. She didn't copy anything. That would be risky. But she quickly snapped photos with her phone, capturing emails that mentioned questionable transactions. With Lara, the approach would be more direct. Sophia began earning the teenager's trust by complimenting her photos, showing interest in her video ideas, and even suggesting fashion trends. Flattered, Lara started sharing more, including the content of that forbidden post she'd mentioned days earlier. It was a video of her and a friend destroying merchandise from a local store, for fun. If that ever got out, it would not only damage the family's image but could also lead to legal trouble. Gustavo would be the easiest. His explosive temper and reckless use of the corporate credit card were gold mines. Sophia quietly began keeping every receipt and delivery slip that arrived in his name. All it would take was a neatly organized file to prove the abuse if the time came. But Sophia knew that information alone didn't topple people. She had to create situations that made the Andrade family turn on each other. If they started to distrust one another, their unity would shatter and their defenses would fall. The following week, she put her first active move into play. Over breakfast, she casually mentioned to Lucia that Gustavo seemed worried about a recent purchase. She pretended to have seen him hiding a box in the closet. Lucia frowned, and Sophia knew the seed of suspicion was planted. The next day, she forgot a piece of paper in the kitchen drawer. It was a deliberately smudged printout of a fake conversation she had carefully crafted between two people discussing the party Lara organized in secret. Lucia found the paper and, just as Sophia predicted, immediately confronted her daughter. The atmosphere in the mansion began to shift. What once was an artificial harmony turned into sideways glances, slamming doors, and long silences at the dinner table. Sophia kept serving coffee and clearing plates with her usual neutral demeanor, but inside, she savored the sweet taste of progress. To top it off, on a Thursday night, she anonymously sent a local journalist, known for exposing scandals, an envelope containing copies of the photos of Roberto's suspicious contracts. It wasn't the final blow, but it was enough to create a buzz that, when it reached the right ears, would keep the patriarch awake at night. Now, all Sophia had to do was wait. The gears were in motion, and she knew that when the first piece fell, the avalanche would be unstoppable. The morning of the confrontation began with an unusual silence in the Andrade mansion. The usual sounds, the constant pings from Lara's phone, the slamming doors, and Lucia's sharp commands, were gone. In their place hung a heavy stillness, as if the air itself had thickened. While Sophia prepared breakfast, she knew the day had come. Every piece was in place, and now all that was left was to watch the dominoes fall. The first to break the silence was Roberto. He strode into the kitchen, his face more tense than Sophia had ever seen, holding a folded newspaper. He slammed it onto the counter. The headline, in bold letters, read, "Roberto Andrade's business involved in suspicious transactions." "This is a lie," he said, his voice thick with anger, but with a trace of worry he couldn't hide. "Whoever did this is going to pay." Lucia entered right behind him, her eyes blazing. "Lie or not, the press is already calling me. Do you know what this means for our image?" Roberto opened his mouth to respond, but Lara came running down the stairs, clutching her phone. "Mom!" she cried, almost in panic. Someone leaked that video from the store. My Instagram is getting destroyed." Lucia spun toward her daughter, stunned. "What video?" Lara froze, realizing she'd said too much. Before she could come up with an excuse, Gustavo walked in, tossing a stack of papers onto the table. "And this?" he demanded, glaring at Roberto. "These charges on the corporate card? Mom, look at this." Lucia snatched the papers, flipping through them quickly. "You used the company card to buy clothes and video games?" "That's not all," Gustavo shot back, pointing at his father. "He doesn't care what I do, as long as he can keep covering up his dirty deals." Roberto took a step forward, voice rising. "Watch your mouth, boy." While father and son exchanged accusations, Lucia turned back to Lara. "I want to know about this video now." "It's nothing," the girl shouted, her voice cracking. "It was just a joke." "A joke that's on the local news," Roberto cut in, snatching the phone from her hands. "You destroyed merchandise in a store and posted it online? Are you trying to ruin us?" The argument's volume rose with every second. Sophia stood silently in the kitchen doorway, as if she were nothing more than a distant observer. Inside, however, her heartbeat matched the rhythm of every blow they dealt each other. The shouting reached its peak when Lucia, nearly screaming, accused Roberto of being the cause of all their problems. "Your greed brought us here. And you think your obsession with keeping a perfect image didn't help?" he shot back. "Look at our children." By now, Lara was sobbing on the couch, Gustavo was pounding his fists on the table, and Roberto and Lucia were hurling insults like longtime enemies. The perfect family lay in pieces, and Sophia knew that even if they managed to contain the public scandal, the internal cracks would never heal. But there was still one final move, the last surgical blow. That afternoon, while everyone was busy fielding phone calls and trying to put out media fires, Sophia quietly left a brown envelope on Lucia's bed. Inside were printed conversations and photos, carefully edited, to imply that Roberto had used his wife's name to sign a fraudulent contract, shielding himself legally. When Lucia found the envelope and its contents, the scream that echoed down the hall was confirmation. The confrontation had crossed the point of no return. That night, dinner never happened. Lucia locked herself in her room, Roberto left without saying where he was going, and the children retreated to their corners, drowning in shame and resentment. As Sophia closed the back door on her way out, the cold night wind brushed her face. She didn't smile. She didn't need to. The silence she left behind was the exact sound of vengeance fulfilled, and it was deafening. The days following the Andrade family's collapse were a parade of headlines, vicious social media comments, and unannounced visits from reporters at the mansion gates. Sophia watched from a distance, like someone observing a castle crumble stone by stone. Yet, even with all the chaos, she knew something was still missing. Her revenge was complete on the surface, but she still had one final card to play. It was a secret not even the Andrades themselves knew. A detail Sophia had stumbled upon years earlier, purely by chance, and had kept hidden until now. An old document she'd found while cleaning Roberto's office that proved one of the family's most valuable assets, a historic beachfront house, did not legally belong to them. The property had been acquired through a fraudulent scheme and registered in the name of a third party who was never located. Sophia had made copies, sealed away in an envelope at the back of her apartment closet. At first, she'd intended to keep it as protection in case she ever needed leverage, but now, with the family already publicly ruined, she realized this would be the final blow, one that would ensure the Andrades would never recover. On a quiet Wednesday afternoon, when the mansion was still and empty, Sophia discreetly sent an envelope similar to the first, but this time addressed to an investigative journalist known for his relentless work exposing powerful families involved in corruption. Inside, along with the documents, was an anonymous note. The truth always finds a way to surface. Perhaps it's time this story is told. 3 days later, the report went live. The story exposed the full irregularity of the property's acquisition and revealed that, legally, it should be returned to the state. The reaction was immediate: lawsuits, asset freezes, and a flood of public outrage. But the real implosion didn't come from the media. It came from within. Upon hearing the news, Lucia refused to believe Roberto had never told her about the property's origins. He, in turn, accused her of orchestrating the leak. Whatever trust remained between them evaporated completely. Lara, now offline and isolated from her former friends, began telling her mother she suspected Gustavo of being tied to the leaks. Gustavo, angry and paranoid, hinted that Lara might have handed everything over to distract from the store video scandal. The mansion, once a symbol of power and prestige, became a minefield where every closed door hid a new verbal attack. Meanwhile, Sophia carried on with her routine as if nothing had happened. At work, she cleaned, organized, and answered politely. But at home, she sat on her porch with a cup of tea, watching the sunset with the calm of someone who knew she had won. The whole city was talking about the Andrade downfall, and for Sophia, there was no greater satisfaction than knowing it had all been done in silence, without leaving a single trace that could link her to the events. Her revenge hadn't been quick or loud. It had been built with patience, one step at a time, until it became inevitable. And now, as the Andrade empire unraveled in courtrooms and headlines, Sophia was certain of one thing: that family would never recover. But deep down, she also knew that if anyone ever tried to hurt her again, she was more than ready to start all over. The Andrade mansion was never the same again. The once pristine walls, adorned with expensive paintings and photographs from lavish international trips, now felt cold, almost empty, as if they had absorbed the weight of the arguments, the accusations, and the suffocating silence that had settled within. Roberto spent most of his time locked away in his office, buried under piles of documents and urgent phone calls with lawyers. Trust in his business partners had evaporated, and every meeting was a desperate attempt to salvage what remained of his reputation and assets. Lucia, on the other hand, avoided being seen in public. The society columns that once celebrated her lavish parties and charitable events now either ignored her or, worse, used her name as a cautionary tale of rise and fall in high society. Her days were consumed by legal consultations and endless conversations with image consultants who tried, without success, to rebuild something that had already shattered. Lara rarely left her room. Without social media to feed her ego, and with former friends avoiding any connection to the Andrade name, she had become a shadow of her former self. Gustavo, in contrast, spoke constantly about leaving the city and starting over, something he knew deep down would be impossible with his debts and tarnished reputation. To the outside world, the Andrades still existed, but only as a faint echo of what they once were. Inside, they were nothing but fragments of a family, each trapped in their own bubble of resentment, shame, and regret. And Sophia? She carried on with her life as usual. She now worked in a different house, smaller, quieter, where the atmosphere was light and respectful. No one there knew of her past with the Andrades, and she intended to keep it that way. There were no trophies, no physical reminders of her revenge, only the quiet certainty that justice, in her own way, had been served. Sometimes, when she passed by the old mansion, its gates now less busy, the garden slightly neglected, Sophia allowed herself a brief glance. It wasn't a smirk of mockery, nor a smile of pride. It was simply the acknowledgement that time and patience had been her greatest weapons. She knew that if she told her story, few would believe it. After all, who would imagine that a seemingly submissive, invisible nanny could dismantle one of the city's most influential families without ever raising suspicion? But deep down, Sophia didn't need anyone to believe her. Her revenge wasn't meant for applause or recognition. It was meant to return to her the dignity they had tried to take away. And as she walked down streets bathed in the light of the setting sun, head held high and step steady, one certainty stayed with her. Some victories need no audience. Only the silence and the peace of knowing that, in the end, Those who had humiliated her paid the exact price for it.